Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Rami Bahati. I'm an immigrant from Uganda, and I am a graduate student at Columbia University School of Journalism, currently working as a news reporter for NYC Reopens and New York City Lens. Thank you very much for sparing time and for joining us this evening. I'm honored to be moderating this important conversation that is going to directly address issues affecting African immigrant communities in New York and America at large under President Joe Biden. As you already know, President Biden is talking about immigration reforms, and some of these may impact us on the state and federal level. So the new era is upon us. The past 4 years of Donald Trump were dominated by issues of division, economic downturn, and COVID-19. We have hope in the Biden administration, and there is ground for optimism. This meeting is about bringing optimism to these African immigrant communities in New York City and America. First of all, in a special way, I would like to introduce the Africa Center, which has brought us together tonight, and the New York City Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. So this meeting is basically organized by 4 organizations: the Africa Center, the New York City Office for Immigrant Affairs, African Communities Together, and also the African Services Committee. It's going to tell us how best we can take advantage of the policies that are coming up, address our issues that we have, and see how best we can go through all this and then actually push for our own agenda as African immigrant communities in New York. I would like in a special way to thank the mayor's office for actually organizing all this and for bringing us the people in power to tell us about these issues and to respond to our concerns. So it's basically a meeting that inspires enthusiasm and advances the thought and action around Africa's global influence, you know? So before I introduce the speakers, I would like to invite you to watch a very brief message from the US Senator for New York, Kirsten Gillibrand, who has a message for all of us as African immigrant communities.
Hi, this is Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, and I am so pleased to be joining you for the Africa Center's first program of 2021. There is no question that last year was extremely difficult for all New Yorkers, but especially for immigrant communities and communities of color. The pandemic, like most crises, hit those communities first and worst and magnified existing inequalities. And while many people continue to go to their essential jobs, keeping our transit system, hospitals, stores, restaurants, and city running, they were barred from help by lack of resources in their language or by their immigration status. It's more important than ever that we stand together and celebrate the diversity, which we know is our greatest strength. The contributions of New York City's African communities and immigrants are invaluable, and they enrich the fabric of our city, state, and nation. We must do more for the immigrant communities who make New York City what it is. As we begin this new year and welcome the Biden-Harris administration, we can begin to implement a real recovery plan that includes all of our communities. And we can take new approaches to issues including public health, economic inequality, race, immigration, and asylum. So please share your stories, advocating for your communities and raising your concerns. I will do everything I can to lift up your voices in Washington and fight for the changes we so desperately need. I want to thank everyone at the African Center for the important educational and artistic programs you offer that speak to diverse immigrant experience in New York. Your work helps bring awareness and advocacy to immigrant communities. And to everyone else joining us today, my office is here for you. If you or any of the people you serve need help, you can visit gillibrand.senate.gov and click help, or send an email to casework@gillibrand.senate.gov. Thank you again for all that you do, and enjoy your conference. God bless.
Thank you very much, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. We really do appreciate that message, the Africa Center, and specifically do appreciate that message. You've had her. You can reach out to her office anytime you need help. So before I dive deep into this conversation, I would like to introduce the amazing panelists that we have tonight. We have Amaha Kessar, who is the founder and executive director of African Communities Together. Amaha has 25 years of professional as a labor community organizer, non-profit director, and social entrepreneur. We are very happy to have you, Amaha. I would like you to say hello to the audience.
Thank you, Remy. It's a pleasure to be with you all and with the other panelists. Looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much. So I would also like to introduce Amanda Lark, who is the Director of Advocacy and LGBTQ Programming of Africa Services Committee. Amanda began working with HIV AIDS Direct Services and Advocacy in New York City in 1994. You can count that, 20-something years of experience, and she has helped to resettle LGBTQ African immigrants who are seeking asylum, giving them housing, and all that amazing package. Good to have you, Amanda. Say hello to the audience.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction, and I too look forward to the conversation.
Good. I would like to introduce Commissioner Beta Mostofi, who is the Commissioner of NYC Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. She has been at the forefront helping African immigrants settling into New York City. Commissioner Beta, I would like you to say hello to the amazing audience that's joining us tonight.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to the Africa Center, and of course to you, Remy, to all of the wonderful partners that have joined, and Asmahan from my team also for helping to organize. It's really great to be here and to be a part of this discussion.
Thank you so much for joining. We're so privileged to have you and to respond to our concerns as African immigrants. I would like to introduce Cesar Vargas, who is the Legislative Director to the New York City District 38 Council Member, Carlos Mechancha. I would like you to say hello, Mr. Cesar.
Hi, Remy. Thank you so much, and definitely a pleasure to join incredible advocates and just public servants who are dedicating themselves to the community and obviously the immigrant community in general, and making sure that we are providing as much support as possible. And definitely Councilmember Menchaca, as chair of the Committee on Immigration, wants to ensure that all immigrant communities are supported in our great city.
Well, thank you very much, Cesar. I would like to say one amazing thing about Cesar. He's nationally recognized as a leader who has been at the forefront fighting for immigration reforms and the DREAM Act. Thank you so much for the wonderful work. So I'm going to go straight to the questions that I have for you tonight. And the first question that I have, feel free to jump in if you have any remarks or anything you have to say about this. It's just going to be more of an open question for the entire panelists. So, given the recent administration and congressional transition, what do you think will be the fundamental changes in the American immigration system?
I'm happy to start and then certainly invite our partners to add more, which I know they will have to share. I think this is a moment where there is a deep recognition and understanding from not just our communities and our movement and our organizers and those of us who work closely on the ground and understand the just incredible need there is to treat immigrant communities with dignity, to recognize in particular 4 years of just unbelievable racist, xenophobic policies that have so intensely impacted communities of color and which have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic right here in our city as well. It's a moment where that understanding is something that we've seen the new administration, the Biden-Harris administration, recognize and commit out of the gate to not just addressing the horrific policies we saw during the Trump era, but to reorienting and reforming our immigration system to be more humane, to be more just, and to be more equitable. And I think to realize those commitments, we were thrilled and celebrated the day one executive order on a moratorium on deportations, on the end of the racist Muslim and African bans, on a promise to defend DACA, and so much more. But most importantly, also a commitment on legislation for a pathway to legalization for the 11 million undocumented immigrants in our communities, many who right here in New York City are our essential workers who have kept us going throughout this pandemic. And so I think to keep building on those promises to ensure that we see not just those immediate victories, but again, that change in our system entirely, and one that is better not just for our communities, but for everybody, will necessitate some of the incredible advocacy work that has happened this last 4 years to get us to this moment, and is needed to continue. And I want to emphasize, particularly for Black immigrant communities, that included in that pathway to legalization are so many of our TPS holders right here in New York City, many who are Black immigrant community members who have been in our city for decades, who are part of our workforce at higher rates than native-born Americans. So it really essential work to be done. And also the extension, I failed to say, of the DED process for Liberians was also announced on day one, something that we've been really honored to partner with groups like African Communities Together and others in advocating for that extension and seeing it realized. So our Liberian community members know that they still have the opportunity now to apply for their pathway to citizenship, and we don't want to miss that opportunity.
Thank you so much,
Commissioner. Cesar, do you want to go second?
Yes, I'll just add that especially the shift in what we have in this new administration is definitely focusing on respect, and this goes to the extent that all immigrant communities should deserve the respect that we all deserve, right? And specifically within the African immigrant community, we saw this administration over the past 4 years refer to African countries as "quote unquote" shithole countries and other countries that were not part of European type Eurocentric nations. So we definitely are seeing a shift in terms of policy, in terms of rhetoric. But of course, what matters is in terms of concrete, as the commissioner mentioned about the day one, the defer enforcement departure that is protecting Liberian immigrants here in New York City. And in Staten Island, where I lived, a big population of Liberians, Ghanaian community. So we want to make sure that all our communities have those resources. And ultimately, one of the most important thing is that regardless of what administration, all our immigrant communities deserve the respect. And we want to make sure that we're holding accountable both administrations. Just as we held accountable the Biden administration, we're going to hold accountable this administration to ensure they follow up on those policies that are protecting and are including and, for example, ensuring that the diversity visa program is fully implemented, if not expanded, to ensure that more African immigrants can be able to qualify. So those are some of the aspects that it's great on this changes, critical, but we want to make sure this administration goes beyond just simply doing a few changes. Our immigrant communities, our African immigrant communities were essential in this election, in turnout, in votes, and they came out, and that's the most important thing: respect and action from this administration.
Thank you so much. As you hold this current administration accountable, we'll be knocking on your door every day to hold you accountable, following up on this. Thank you. Mr. Amaha, what do you have to say about this?
Just following up on some of the themes that Pita and Cesar raised. So I think what's already started is undoing some of the damage done over the past 4 years to trust, to dignity, to belonging, in this country, to African immigrants, to other Black immigrants in the U.S., and to our immigrant community members more broadly. So undoing not just the Muslim ban, but also the Africa ban that was passed in early 2020 that specifically blocked Nigerians, Eritrean, Sudanese, and Tanzanian families from migrating legally. Bita mentioned the extension, the 1-year extension of deferred enforced departure for Liberian immigrants, which was one of the 17 executive orders signed on President Biden's first day in office, which we were very proud of that. That was a result of a lot of advocacy. And what that will do is enable Liberians who qualify for a program called Liberian Refugee Immigration Fairness Program, or LRIF, to adjust their status legally and become permanent residents and ultimately citizens of the U.S. And then some of the sending a message to ICE to stand down deportation for 100 days, instituting a 100-day moratorium. Those were all very important first steps and things that happened out of the gate to undo the damage of the last 4 years. But first of all, we saw that even those steps are not going to necessarily be easy. There was a judge in Texas who's now blocked the efforts to have a deportation moratorium. We think that that block is ultimately going to fail. We don't think it's on good legal grounds. We think that as president, of course, Joe Biden has the ability to tell Immigration and Customs Enforcement to halt deportations until there's a review. But it just goes to show, we have challenges at multiple levels, whether it's judges appointed by the last administration or immigration enforcement officers put in place by the last administration. But the bigger point is that the injustice and the disconnect of our immigration system didn't begin under the Trump administration. It didn't begin under the Obama administration. It has really been, it goes back in some ways to the founding of this country, but certainly in the last decades, we've seen a growing disconnect between the value, the human dignity of immigrants, and the ways that we are treated by the laws and policies of this country. So we have a big job ahead of us to fight for full citizenship for all, for 11 million plus, starting with DACA holders and TPS holders, to decriminalize enforcement of the immigration laws and to ensure that there's some rational and humane means for people to migrate legally to the U.S., including restoring things like the diversity visa and the refugee resettlement program. It's a much bigger job than any one administration can do on their own. It's really going to be up to all of us.
All right. Thank you so much for your submission. Miss Amanda, what do you have to say about this?
I really don't have too much to add to what's already been said, except to say that the feeling it's palpable within the community. The feeling of relief and a permission to exhale. I'll leave it there.
All right. I appreciate that. Moving on, another question is, the Trump administration had little consideration both in policy and engagement with Africans in America and abroad. And this is true. Remember his scandal when he called African nations shithole nations? So what type of policy changes do you see Biden implementing, and do you see the attitude towards Africans changing? Let's begin with Commissioner Bita.
Thank you for the question. And, I began by sort of naming some of the policies out the gate that the Biden administration has made to remedy some of those most egregious harms that we saw, including the Muslim and African bans as being a primary example of that, and certainly one that is responsive to what we saw over and over again, which was a hateful, racist rhetoric towards Africans, towards Muslims and others, and from President Trump himself, right? Very intentional from him himself. I think it's really, really important and significant that we've seen an articulated commitment to building an administration that looks like America, that there's a recognition that has been a failure of government to do, and a critical response to the challenges and racial injustices of this moment is to build out an administration that looks like the people that are in it. I think that is a very important and good signal from the administration. I think that they have infused, as part of their pillars and platforms, a commitment to racial justice through all that they do as an administration is a really important signal. And of course, rhetoric matters, right? We saw that over and over again in the Trump administration. We saw right here in New York City, hate crimes rise across many immigrant communities at different moments because of the comments and rhetorics that came out of the president's mouth. And so we know how important it is that the bully pulpit is used to prop people up, to demonstrate value for everybody, dignity and respect for everybody, and that also will have an impact.
Right. Mr. Vargas, what do you have to say about this? Do you see, because so many people are already biased by what President Trump actually put in their minds, that African nations are shithole nations, do you see attitude change towards Africans under Biden's administration?
Absolutely, and we're seeing that not just in the rhetoric of the Biden administration, but also in terms of the actual staffing up of key immigration agencies like the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. That's an agency that's responsible for processing immigration benefits like green cards, DACA, temporary protected status. So, and just seeing the people that are being hired in those positions to really dismantle the anti-immigrant deportation machine that President Donald Trump turned USCIS into is obviously going to take work, as Amma had mentioned, but it's obviously we still have a lot of work to do. But based on the attitude, we're definitely seeing a different type of attitude across different field offices that we have contacted with. So, for example, in New York, we definitely have a very different type of attitude of the USCIS field director. We have in states like Alabama, Iowa, we definitely are seeing that sense. And of course, the new Department of Homeland Security Secretary, Alexandra Mayorkas has been obviously tells his own immigration story. So we definitely see a very different type of attitude, both in rhetoric, in policy so far. And of course, we also see in the staffing of people who are going to be leading these agencies. But as we mentioned, of course, it's great that we have much more people who are going to be amenable to ensure that African immigrants are treated with respect. But we need to make sure that we're following up with this officials to ensure that they are actually processing applications, they're processing immigration courts as well. That's another critical component. So we want to make sure that these officials, because they're the ones on the ground directly processing and on the front lines of immigration policy, not just in Washington, D.C., but in our field offices in our cities. So that's very important.
All right. Mr. Maher, you work with these African communities. What do they tell you? I just want to hear from you what these African immigrants tell you when you hear from them.
Yeah, I mean, I think like some of our fellow panelists and even some of the community members who are in the chat, I think at most people at this point, most people are sort of waiting and seeing what happens and trying to understand the actions that the administration has taken so far. As others have mentioned, there have been some very good and hopeful first steps. Some of them have been executive actions like the repealing of the Africa ban. Some of them have been the introduction of legislation on the first day that would be the most sweeping sort of reform of access to citizenship and opening up a path to citizenship for millions, for the bulk of, if not all, of undocumented immigrants in the U.S., with priority given to those who have DACA, TPS or who are farm workers. So people look at those and they see kind of hopeful signs, like, but it's early days. And people want to know if those promises are going to be delivered on. And of course, it's not all within the control of the president. There's a lot the president can do, right? And we've seen, some of the things the office of the president can do for harm in terms of immigration enforcement or policies that break our immigration courts, our asylum courts, that halt immigration processing to a standstill, that refuse to issue visas. And so now we're gonna see what the president can do for good to reverse those policies. But for things like real immigration reform, real path to citizenship for undocumented, we need Congress. And it's still a very tight Congress. It's 50-50 in the Senate. So it's going to really rely on some Republican senators to cross the aisle. It's going to rely on us putting enough pressure on Republican members of the House, even here in New York. We have members to be more pro-immigrant than some of their colleagues. This is not going to get done on a party line vote, unfortunately. And so, some things can happen immediately. Some things are really going to take a longer term fight.
Thank you so much for your submission. Amanda, what do you have to say?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
The question is, the fact that President Donald Trump had actually created this different image of Africa and Africans in the US, do we see attitude changes under the Biden's administration?
I believe we will. Again, I feel like everything's been said already. Perhaps I should jump on first for the next questions. But really, yeah, everything has been said, folks. The folks that we see are extremely excited for what's ahead. But of course, as Amahar mentioned, these are promises. We do need Congress. And to that point, we as a advocacy community, we still do not let up on speaking with city and state to be able to access those certain services, not of course any immigration services, but those wraparound services, which are so critical to survival here in the city and here in the US.
Thank you, Ms. Amanda. Mr. Vargas. Most African immigrants either do not qualify for government assistance and are struggling to access the benefits that are available for them. And this is solely because of President Trump's administration changes to the public charge rule. And most African immigrants that I talk to, they're either scared of going to access programs like Medicaid because they're scared this is going to affect their status, especially when they apply for green card. So I just want to know, is the city going to give the immigrants assurance that it will not give a chilling effect on those seeking access to benefits for immigrant communities?
Thank you for the question, and absolutely. And one of the things that, as you mentioned about it, is the fear that that the previous administration instilled in immigrant communities across the country was very real. And even though, for example, the public charge rule that would have prevented people from applying for a green card or a visa, not U.S. citizenship, it never really was implemented because it was challenged in court. Nevertheless, the fear was very real. We saw people pretty much disenrolling from benefits that they were legally entitled to. But as we work with incredible partners like Commissioner Mustafi and the New York City Mayors of Immigrant Affairs to ensure that we got information out there, we partner up with local community organizations across the city to ensure that we provided that obviously that the public charge was not implemented. We ensured that we got information like pro bono legal services like Action NYC to get out there and make sure people call and consult with an attorney to understand their specific immigration statuses. So that was very critical, those legal services. And of course, the other assurances that we remind our community that New York City is a sanctuary city, that we do not share information with immigration customs enforcement. And obviously there's very strict policies to ensure that we are protecting the privacy of immigrant communities, whether they are entering a government building when they could, when due to COVID, or when they're applying for the ID NYC. And the commission can speak more about the program that has enabled millions of New Yorkers to get us an actual municipal ID that Councilmember Carlos Menchaca championed in the City Council. So one of the things that we can definitely say is that we have made as much effort to ensure that there's pro bono legal services, make sure that we have translated information in various languages to ensure that people are understanding this information in their native language, and most important, reminding that we are now cooperating with immigration customs enforcement. Of course, we can definitely do more in the city, and that's exactly why we want to make sure that we hear from the community to hold government accountable, because at the end of the day, we need to respond to your concerns. We need to respond to the concerns of the community.
Thank you so much.
I'm gonna jump in here just to share that it was actually the African Services Committee, along with 4 other nonprofit advocacy organizations here in the city, that filed the lawsuit to block the implementation of the public charge before it took effect in October of 2019. And I should give props here to the Center for Constitutional Rights for their assistance, Legal Aid Center, and Paul Weiss. But to say, just to say that the anxiety that was wrought by the public charge and similar regulations turned on immigrant communities by the Trump administration, as we go into this, what looks like a beautiful, bright new world, that issue of trust that Amahar referred to is essential. And as much as the city, state, and federal government can do, it really is those community-based organizations like African Services and Amahar's African Communities Together that are able, that have the relationships with the community and are the places that the community turns to for the truth, for assistance in navigating whichever situation they need in terms of benefits, treatment, or care. And it's just a plug really for the community-based organizations as, albeit the gatekeepers for as we go into these new changes. Of course, it's excellent to hear that the public charge rule will be eliminated, but things don't change overnight. Am I right?
Yeah, you're very right. I'd love to add to that, to say just a few things, which is to say it's really, really important to note that the vast majority of people who have withdrawn from benefits or who are eligible for benefits like Medicaid, like SNAP, are not at all impacted by the public charge rule. And this is the biggest challenge that we have seen with this rule, that it has caused people to be afraid and to chill their participation and benefits that they have the perfectly right to. And that which would not have any impact on their immigration status. And so we really, it's of utmost importance at this moment in time, when health and food benefits in particular are critical for their survival of so many more people across our city, that nobody have fear accessing those resources when you're entitled to them. So I sort of beg and plead that if you know of anybody that has that fear or concern, or you think that they might, they can call our Action NYC helpline at 1-800-354-6666. 3645, and we'll put that in the chat as well, and ask any questions that they might have about public charge. And if necessary, they'll be connected with a trusted provider, of which you have great panelists who head organizations or are part of legal department directors who are part of our network. So we really, really want to make sure nobody goes without the resources that they need at this moment. And I want to emphasize as well that there's been explicit language issued by the federal government that COVID-19 testing and treatment is not considered as a part in part of the public charge analysis. So even if you are afraid for other reasons or you think you might be impacted, please call that helpline before making the determination to not seek that care, because it is very likely that it will have no impact on your immigration status. And the city as well is a party to one of the litigations and will continue alongside our community partners to fight to ensure, not just in the courts, but as the Biden administration has promised, that this rule is stopped and reversed.
Thank you so much. I think that will ease on the uncertainty among the African immigrants. Moving on, Commissioner Bitar, we see like New York City is a sanctuary city. And thanks to the mayor's efforts, and please send our special thanks to the mayor. But talking to most Africans seeking asylum in New York City, in the United States, but specifically in New York City, they are stating backlog. I know of African immigrants who are in New York City seeking asylum, but their cases have taken 5-10 years and they're still waiting. So I just want to know from you, what measures are being put in place to clear the asylum backlog, and how soon should these immigrants be expected to be called for interviews to discuss their cases and why they're running away from their home countries?
So thank you for the question. I want to start by recognizing that so many people in our communities who might have questions or concerns about their access to resources. We just want to make sure they have, again, that legal help if they need it. So want to reemphasize the Action NYC number at 1-800-354-0365. And unfortunately, to share that it is not New York City who has control over the asylum system or process. That is controlled entirely at the federal level. And we saw repeatedly in the last 4 years what was already an incredibly bureaucratic and challenging system really have as much salt as possible thrown into those gears to literally stop the asylum process from moving forward at all. And we've seen that across the board in many immigration and all sort of pathways to immigration status, but in particular in some of the most egregious ways in the asylum system. And this is an area where we have seen also commitment from the Biden administration to adjust and to rebuild that system. But as you heard Amanda articulate, and I believe Amaha, some of this will take time, right? Meaning that these are programs that were completely gutted. Staff were moved around, a different culture and practice sort of set in. And it is something that it will take all of us to continue to emphasize and pay attention to see the real changes that are needed.
I'd say we're extremely encouraged by Biden administration's promise to, I believe it's double the number of immigration officers. But the backlog for asylum is at 1 million now. So we know that, again, that's not going to happen overnight. We have folks coming to African services, again, has been mentioned, like 5-6 years waiting. Trump did a very clever thing and reversed the whole asylum process. Normally, when you come in, you would wait quite a number of months, even a couple of years, for your interview. And of course, during that time, you've met with your legal representative, you've built a case, you've gathered the evidence that you need. And what happened then was that the administration decided that as soon as you entered the United States, you were basically going to be granted an interview. making out that they believed that people were coming asking for asylum so that they could be given a work permit within 180 days, which of course is insane. But that has contributed then to the backlog. People who had been waiting were put to the bottom, and those who came in got their appointments pretty quickly, but many also did not have the most robust legal defense that they might have previously had. So yeah, it's going to take time. It's just going to take time. And I think that's going to be a big part of our work is passing that information on, that it's going to take some time. But there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Thank you. Cesar, what's the plan for the city to expedite like cases which have been pending for so many years?
Well, as we all say, right, the limited authority of the city to actually expedite those cases. Obviously, a lot of these cases are before immigration courts, and that's out of the jurisdiction of most municipal governments. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that, for example, the council member is always in support of specific cases, writing letters of support, and such as other council members in specific district. They've been very supportive of ensuring that those who have pending cases, if they need any type of support, please reach out to your council members to ensure that you can get a letter of support, and obviously from advocates. And the other components is making sure part of this bigger legislative effort is to ensure that we are advocating not just for a path to citizenship, for the 11 million undocumented, or for other more permanent relief for our African immigrant community, but we want to make sure that we are also advocating for those funding into our immigration courts to ensure that they are streamlining those court cases, and obviously and the other thing is making sure that we are holding accountable the Department of Justice, because a lot of these immigration judges are not independent judges, right? They're not some bit of what this Trump administration tried to do is just make them like a deportation machine, just like making them like fulfill quotas of how many people they deport. So we obviously want to bring in independence to this immigration courts to ensure that our immigrant communities have their day in court that is fair, that is just, and they can really get their arguments heard. So I know the city of New York is advocating obviously for all these changes, but the last thing I will say is that it's because all these discussions are happening about legislation, about benefits, about citizenship, about green cards. Please be careful about immigration fraud. Make sure that no one can promise you right now a path to citizenship. No one can promise you a green card in a matter of days or even weeks. So if somebody tells you, hey, I can fix your papers, or I can do this, or because you've been here for 10 years and you have a sick child, you can get a green card, that's a lie. So first talk to reliable attorneys like Action NYC to ensure that you can get one pro bono legal advice and also reliable advice. Then that's the most important thing.
Thank you. Mr. Casa, what do you have to say about this?
I think people spoke to most of the key points around what's broken in asylum, and I'll just underscore Bita's point that this administration deliberately broke the asylum review and adjudication process. The kind of last in, first out policy that Amanda described was deliberate. It was a way of keeping people who'd been here for years waiting more years to have their case heard, and to make sure that people who just arrived did not get the benefit of a day in court. We've seen the other efforts that made life worse for asylum seekers, extending the period that they had to wait to get a work authorization. That frankly outrageous proposal to charge people to apply for humanitarian immigration status, which is, just flies in the face of the refugee treaty and our other humanitarian commitments under international law. Those were deliberate measures. So stopping that will go a long way, but we really need to do more. We need to have immigration courts that actually work. They need to be independent. and autonomous of DOJ so that they're not under political pressure, and they need to be adequately funded. And frankly, asylum seekers should have a guaranteed right to counsel, where they are guaranteed free immigration counsel to present their case.
Thank you so much. Moving on, the US is one of the world's most affected countries when it comes to COVID-19. While in Africa, so many African nations the impact has been relatively minimal. So in light of this, COVID-19 has really exposed the American health system. What lessons do we learn from this? I know so many African immigrant communities have been affected by COVID-19. But what lessons do we draw from this whole experience of COVID-19 coming in, the politicians downplaying it, and here we are today. Lots of people have died from this pandemic and so many are infected. What lessons do we learn and what can we learn from Africa in terms of handling the pandemic?
I think we all agree that this pandemic has really laid bare the racial and ethnic health disparities in this country, negatively affecting communities of color. And with COVID specifically, where it's 1/3 of immigrants in New York State are essential workers, it has been our immigrant brothers and sisters who have been on the front lines and have been most affected, have had their health most affected. We again are working to push New York State to pass a bill, a temporary bill that lasts as long as COVID lasts. Literally, it's a temporary bill expansion to allow immigrants to be able to buy into the essential plan if they've been infected with COVID, to cover their treatment and cost post-emergency Medicaid, post the coverage that you get should you fall sick with COVID. We can't, even though, again, we have these promises from the Biden administration. They've reopened up the Affordable Care Act, parts of the Affordable Care Act, but particularly a condition like COVID, it can't wait. COVID can't wait for the next Congress to sit. We have to have action now. And New York is known as the state of immigrants, and we do have some of the best services available to particularly undocumented folks. And we're trying to push the state to expand that and to really lead the country once again in benefits available for immigrants.
Yeah, I'd love to add to that if that's okay.
Yeah, of course, sure.
Okay, great. I just to make sure that people are aware, we know that in New York there are about 300,000 or so undocumented immigrants who are uninsured. So New Yorkers who are uninsured or underinsured. But we've actually started to put a dent in that number. And that's because just couple years ago, I'm very proud to have been part of the team that helped launch NYC Care. And NYC Care is a guaranteed health care program for all New Yorkers, regardless of immigration status or ability to pay, through our public hospital systems. And that means that recognizing that longstanding health disparities are very often linked to people's lack of access to primary care and specialty care in a ongoing or continued basis. The program offers a program with access to your primary care physician, pharmacy, specialty care, just as a health insurance program would, but regardless, again, of immigration status or ability to pay. And we have been partnering with community providers to share information and spread the word about this. It's such a critical program, but it's fairly new, so it's so important that people know of its availability as we continue to fight, as Amanda said, at the state level and also the federal level to address the fact that the Affordable Care Act left out these communities and populations. And so I want to just make sure that people know how to access it, and Asmahan is sharing the information there, nyccare.gov, 646 NYC Care 2 people can call.
I agree with you as well that Africa has not got enough pats on the back on how the continent has handled the COVID pandemic thus far, and believe that the huge difference being that those systems were for the most part in place in terms of epidemics. When we look at the HIV AIDS epidemic on the continent, the systems that you may hear about now in the US, this contact tracing, something very similar was in existence for the HIV AIDS pandemic. And so this is an experienced health system around pandemics, along with Ebola, HIV AIDS, and coronavirus is yet another one. But yeah, the numbers have been astounding. Extremely proud.
And I'd love to add another kind of key lesson, particularly that as it affects African immigrants in the U.S. from the coronavirus pandemic. I think one other thing that was underscored by the pandemic here locally in New York City was the importance of expanding language access. We've been in regular discussion with Moya and with other parts of the administration. And one thing we saw was basically the number of languages that the city was distributing health information in double, during the pandemic. I think, is it 25 currently, Bita? 25 languages. And I think what this pandemic really underscored is that people being able to have access to reliable, trustworthy, language accessible information is not just an issue for that community, but for everybody, right? Because if there's a language isolated community, then it's a community isolated from health information. It's a community that's at risk of COVID and puts itself and its neighbors at risk. So, we've been working with Moya and with, Councilman Menchaca's office as chair of the Immigration Committee around expansion of language access through things like creating a language bank and language worker co-ops that would expand, especially our hundreds of African languages, making those more readily available for interpretation and translation. And COVID really brought that home in a really vivid way.
Thank you so much. I was actually wondering how these African immigrants are enduring this unprecedented pain. Do you want to elaborate more on that?
Sure. I would say that African immigrants have been in every, have been disproportionately affected by every aspect of the pandemic. I think, especially during the early days of the pandemic, we mourned a lot of community members who died, like a lot of other New Yorkers. Some of them were elderly, some of them and vulnerable. Some of them were caregivers. So first affected by the pandemic as a health threat, and then second, economically, our community members, we did a survey of 1,400 African immigrants and who came to us seeking COVID relief. And some of the things that they told us were of the ones who own businesses, all but about 30% of them, their business was shut down and they weren't sure if it would reopen. So, a lot of small merchants, some restaurants, our African women who are self-employed and braid hair, a lot of those folks were hit very hard. We also, of course, had a lot of essential workers in the delivery industry. If you, I don't know about the rest of the city, but here in Harlem, if you order delivery, it's a 50-50 chance that your delivery person is going to be West African. As drivers, commercial drivers, as retail workers, and of course, in healthcare, especially home healthcare. Africans are essential workers, and many of them are really on the front lines. And then many have been excluded from COVID relief, whether that's a stimulus check or unemployment, either because they were off the books or because they were undocumented. Many did not get formal COVID relief. Luckily, we were able to partner with organizations like the Mayor's Office to distribute private relief to many of those excluded workers. But we really need the state and the federal government to step up and fund longer-term relief for excluded workers, including a lot of our African immigrants.
Thank you, Mr. Kassa. Cesar, I know so many undocumented immigrants really want to legalize their status in New York City and America at large. Do we see the city trying to advocate for the implementation of the 1986 law that allows them to legalize their status? Like Mr. Kassa has been saying, most of them really want to fit in so they can get these benefits that are being given to other taxpayers. Where do we see ourselves? Where do we see the undocumented African immigrants?
Yes. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you.
To be specific, maybe if you can give us an office that these undocumented immigrants can call to legalize their status or to fit into society, because there is a lot of trauma going on. I cannot disclose this information, but there are so many of them, and I get to know some of them as a journalist.
Of course, thank you for the question. It's so critical, and you've heard us all talk about how so many of our undocumented workers have been and continue to be on the front lines, keeping our city going at the hardest period of time we've faced in quite some time. So it's really, really a critical question. I think I want to start and maybe repeat a couple of times what you've heard from Cesar and Amaha and others, that at this moment, there is no pathway to legalization. So if you're seeing or hearing advertisement from people who are not known to you or not reputable immigration practices, or don't have accreditation or don't give you a contract, right? There's some best practices to look out for. Please don't be giving anybody your money or filing any paperwork without getting good legal advice that's trusted. And you can learn more about kind of what some of those best practices are to look for in a provider on our website at nyc.gov/immigrants. We have a one-pager that sort of talks about best practices and what to look out for to know if somebody is a reputable and accredited entity to do legal immigration work. But beyond that, we have city-funded programs with tremendously talented and reputable organizations like African Services, like African Communities Together, and we want you to utilize them. So please call that 1-800 number that we shared before in the chat, the Action NYC phone number, 1-800-354-0365. And I want to say that we saw, again, out the gate with the Biden administration, a pathway to citizenship, that they were proposing legislation that would create an expedited or a faster path in 3 years for folks who have TPS, for folks who have DACA, and others, and then an 8-year path for undocumented immigrants who don't fall into that sort of prioritized category. To get that passed, though, we need Congress, as Amaha has said, and we need to ensure that we don't just have Democrats, but that we have some Republicans that understand the importance of immigration and the importance of legislation like this to the recovery of our communities, the economic importance that it has in ensuring that we can recover in a way that we need, right? Immigrants are entrepreneurs. Immigrants contribute to tax dollars. Immigrants are sort of what many communities across this country, not just New York City, have relied upon for population growth, for economic growth. And so it is a vital piece of what we need for recovery from this pandemic. And I'm happy to say that we're part of a coalition of cities across the country that put forward a vision for immigrant action that includes, as one of our #1 priorities, our advocacy for a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million. And you have cities that are in that mix, like Boise in Idaho, like Dodge City in Kansas, like Atlanta in Georgia, like El Paso in Texas, cities across this country who deeply understand that we need immigrants and immigrations to keep our families together, to recover better, and to see economic growth, as well as we have said over and over again, to treat people with dignity and respect.
Thank you. Amanda, real quick, can you give us an update of how the LGBTQ African immigrant community is thriving amidst all this?
I'm sorry. Sorry, say it one more time, Remy.
Yeah, I'm asking you to give us an update of how the LGBTQ community is thriving amidst all this.
Yeah, the LGBT community, at least I can't speak for everybody, but I can certainly speak for the folks that we serve at African Services. We have an LGBTQ African and Caribbean immigrant program. And I would say that the pandemic has only compounded the anxiety and isolation that's experienced by many queer folks when they first arrive in New York City, in the US. Most of the, pretty much all, I'd say, of our LGBTQ immigrants are applying for legal status through the asylum process, which we've already talked about, which has been quite a mess. And so again, we have to wait for that to right itself. But it's it's the isolation and the mental health issues, which I think goes across the board. I mean, I don't think you even have to be an immigrant to admit that you have mental health issues after living through these last 12 months. But yes, it has been more compounded through COVID. But again, folks are hopeful that the asylum process will get back on its feet. And one other thing that Biden has promised is the elimination of the one-year ban, which has been a huge barrier to many folks who have tried to come over for asylum. Of course, most of our LGBTQ folks are coming, fleeing horrendous situations, and that as well plays into the need for the mental health services that we're able to provide here at African Services, and to Amaha's point, the need citywide for increased languages that are able to provide those mental health services. At African Services, I think we have close to 40 staff, 65% of whom are African born, and we have over 20 languages spoken at African Services. So we are able to provide the health and social services that we do in a linguistically competent and culturally competent way. So I would too encourage anyone who is in need of our services to please either call us, walk in, or you can check out the services at www.africanservices.org.
Thank you so much. I see we have a number of questions in the chat, and I'm going to go through them real quick, and feel free to respond to any of these questions that you feel you can respond to, dear panelists. Question 1, and it says, do you think there will be unemployment aid provided for undocumented immigrants here in New York City? Who would like to respond to that?
I can start, and then I think others I'm sure have more to add. So our understanding is that the bill that's been put forward is better in some ways than the previous bill when it comes to assisting excluded workers, workers who are not receiving unemployment or other benefits. or stimulus benefits because of their immigration status, in that it at least allows mixed families with one undocumented member to receive the stimulus. But so far, that's about it, and that's kind of the least. To be realistic, I think we're unlikely to see the Congress authorize extending unemployment relief to undocumented workers. I think we have a much better shot at winning expansive unemployment relief here in New York State. There's an active campaign that's pushing our state to include excluded workers, to tax our billionaire class if need be, to extend unemployment to our excluded workers. And if, as we are hoping is the case, there's a federal bill that gives a block grant to states, a chunk of money, 15, 20, 30 billion dollars to states like New York, we really need to see some of that relief statewide and here in New York City going to expand economic relief to undocumented and other excluded workers like returning citizens and workers in the informal economy.
Yeah,
Question. Go on, Commissioner.
I'd like to build on what Amaha shared, which is to say a couple of things. One, it is really, really critical that we continue to push at the federal level for a more inclusive package, because that's what really realized the mixed status household to be included in the latest stimulus and in the package that we've seen. But I think accurately and would agree that really the most important thing at the federal level as well is to get relief for localities. And that has not happened. And if relief for localities comes through, then it's so fundamentally important that at the state level and here locally, we continue to look at how we can better support workers who have been excluded from stimulus efforts. And here we've been very happy that we've been able to partner with organizations to distribute relief funds through public-private partnership. That's something that we continue to look at building on because we saw how critical it is and just how much it was needed and how quickly the resources were distributed. Additionally, we built on that program. All of the food programs that the city has are available to all New Yorkers, regardless of status, and we want to make sure that nobody goes hungry, and we're continuing to look at some of the challenges that community members shared with us about the food programming and making it more culturally competent, and that's something we're trying to look at improving upon. We also know that food and housing were the number 1 and 2 needs that people expressed to us through the Relief Fund program. And for housing, we have made an intentional effort to ensure that a number of things happen that provide relief to tenants. One, there is a moratorium. There continues to be support through the city's tenant helpline to share information, but also we raised a tremendous amount of resources as well for housing relief for New Yorkers. So funds that can go directly to supporting New Yorkers who need support at this time. You shouldn't be evicted, 1, but 2, you can get support as well through our FASTN program, which is a partnership that we have with Project Parachute and home-based providers, so that New Yorkers who might have been excluded from other forms of rent relief or rental assistance can now receive it through this program. So it's very important that people know that those resources are available now while we continue to build upon and advocate for greater assistance for those who were excluded.
Right. Before I get to the next question, I just want to inform our wonderful audience that we're going to have a poll question at the end of this, and you'll just have to tell us whether this program was informative, was it engaging or thoughtful or provoking, and we'll have an option to choose from whether you strongly agree or disagree. And this will be posted in the chat for all of us to see. So moving on, more questions are coming in, and most of them have been responded to by the panelists, but there is this one which says, do you believe an amnesty will be given to the undocumented immigrants just like they did under the Reagan administration, Ronald Reagan administration?
Yeah, I'll just say something that for me ties a lot of these questions together, especially on the probability of immigration reform, the probability of executive actions, the probability of funding coming into our cities. For me, it really boils down something that I tell the community, that at the end of the day, it's like, whether it's government, whether it's activists, the real power comes from the community. The real power comes from the testimonies of those who are going through the frustrating process of our immigration system, those who have been impacted by COVID, and their African communities in our neighborhood. So for me, the real power is in our communities, and that we do not wait for anything. You have the power to change policy. You have the power to realize this immigration reform, and whether it's talking to your elected officials, your members of Congress, your U.S. senators, or even taking a trip to Washington, D.C., that's really a lot of what really is going to change these policies, and everyone's going to do their part. But at the end of the day, the real power is in our community. The real power, whether you have papers or not, whether you are a citizen or not, we all have the power to express our voice and demonstrate that the African immigrant community deserves respect and deserves immigration reform now and the resources that they deserve, whether it's healthcare, financial aid for businesses, healthcare, you name it. So for me, I want to just really emphasize that at the end of the day, there's so many hypotheticals, many politics, but what is certain is that what's going to move our country forward is to ensure that our immigrant communities, our African immigrant communities, are out there and telling their stories and demanding from our elected officials in Congress that we need these policy changes immediately.
Well said, Cesar. It's up to us. It's up to all of us.
Thank you so much. So this one is coming in from Frank Musisi. What is going to happen to the people who were illegally deported from New York City and state by the Trump administration? Will there be an advocacy for them to return to the city?
I can start, and maybe Amanda, if you can talk about legal pathways and challenges there. You know, unfortunately, I think the only thing that we've seen by way of an immediate commitment from the Biden administration and in their immigration plan is a couple of things. One is for folks who were denied their visas or petitions because of the Muslim or African bans. The executive order articulates a process to review those denials, and that is incredibly important and will be fundamental path to rectifying, again, that really racist policies and just the egregious impact it has had on so many families. But time will tell what that will look like. But that is a commitment, and that was explicitly stated in the executive order as the responsibility of the State Department to do. There was a further commitment speaking to families who were separated at the border and launching a task force specifically to identify and reunite those families and look at their cases. And there's an additional commitment as well to restoring programs like I believe the CAM program or others, where individuals who may be in other countries but would otherwise be eligible to apply for benefits like refugee benefits derived from their parents or family members who might be here, would have the ability to apply from outside of the US, some who may have been impacted at this moment as well. Those are sort of the three things on my radar, but Amanda, I don't know if there are others.
No, that's what I was going to mention, that right to return. And with the family-based immigration, there is going to be a new visa for in family-based immigration where folks will be able to come to the US and receive a work permit and be able to work while they wait for their green card, which is huge. But again, it's going to take Congress.
Thank you very much. And then there is this other one which says, do you think there will be unemployment aid provided for the undocumented immigrants here in New York City?
I think we spoke to that one a little bit earlier. I mean, it's less likely to be passed by Congress, right? Because you have to get a very divided, particularly Senate, to approve something like that. Where it's more likely to happen is at the state level. Whether we do that with getting block grant aid from the federal government for COVID relief, and we designated part of that to including excluded workers in relief, or whether we do revenue raisers right here in New York State by taxing our billionaire class and looking into our the economic resources of our state to expand unemployment to include undocumented immigrants, informal workers in the informal economy, and others who have been excluded from formal unemployment relief and other COVID relief.
This other question is coming in from Samson Baranga, a Ugandan immigrant living in Boston, and he wants to know, for immigrants outside of New York State, what should they look out for in their individual states and cities in terms of organizations that provide support? So it's
I'll just throw something out there, and I may jump off to get the link and drop it in the chat if possible. But we get calls to our hotline from folks from all over the country, and we try to and many of them don't have a partnership with the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs like we do here in New York, where we can provide that support for them. But what we do is there's an excellent website run by I believe it's called Immigrant Advocates, that lists nonprofit and other community-based resources for immigration assistance. You can look them up based on your zip code, look them up based on your if you're in a detention center, like whether they serve that particular detention center. So I'll go look for that link and drop it in the chat.
And I'll just add to that to say that there are many, depending on the locality or place, there are many localities that intentionally on their websites, so offices like ours in different places like Philadelphia, San Francisco, Seattle, Boston, that have resources available on their websites for local providers, some that they might support, but otherwise ones that they know are reputable and trustworthy and are lifting up. So another path to identifying what resources might be available is by identifying through local government kind of what the offices of immigrant affairs or welcoming offices are, and seeing what resources are available on their websites.
Thank you so much. I just want to let the audience get to know that there is a poll question running, and I'm sure you can see it on your screen. I just want you to give us feedback whether this program has been engaging, informative, or provoking. We are very happy to know your thoughts. So moving on to the one last question to all the panelists. One person wants to know about the undocumented, the parents of the what about undocumented parents of US citizens? Is there a special bill for them that is coming up?
That's the DACA.
Yeah. So the history around that is that there was such a bill, such a policy. It was called DAPA, and it was supposed to be an expansion of the DACA that for childhood arrivals for parents of undocumented children who arrived as youth. That was blocked by the courts as something that could not happen solely through the exercise through the president. The president couldn't do that without Congress. And so now the bill that the Biden administration has sent to Congress would include those, among other people who would be not on the fast track like DACA and TPS and farm workers, but on the longer track that would take 8 years to get papers. So if something happened, it may be in the future the Congress takes up a bill specifically for those parents, but it's not going to happen on the presidential side alone. I think, given what the courts have done so far.
All right, so we have very limited time, but I would like to get your closing remarks. Let's begin with Commissioner Bitter.
I want to just thank again the incredible panelists and partners who contributed to the conversation, and the Africa Center and you, Remy, for hosting us, and Asmahan from my team, who's been sharing a lot of resources for all of you in the chat. But we're also happy to work with the Africa Center to share it out more broadly for folks who might have been unable to capture the information in that way. And you know, I want to underscore that this is a happy and hopeful moment. I really appreciate the spirit that Amanda has brought to the conversation and emphasizing that for us. And it's only been made possible because of the organizing and commitment and sacrifice of so many people stepping up and sort of realizing that this isn't a moment to sit on the sidelines. It's a moment to assert we're here, we're proud of who we are, and we know that you need us, right? And that this is our country to make it a better place for our families, for our communities. And I think that spirit that is captured in a moment where you see a president come into office and on day one address so many of the most egregious things and commit to bold action on immigration reform. But that's going to only be possible if we keep lifting our voices, if we keep organizing, as SSR says, and we see the power that we have had to get us to this moment and to translate it into action for a more hopeful future for our families. And I hope that New York City is a place where folks who need resources can come to and to access them. And for us to learn in these forums about the needs of communities is really important. So thank you again for holding them.
Yeah, I would say that, like, you know, when you're running around the racetrack and it's that final lap and you see the big glass of ice water waiting for you at the end of the race, but that last lap around can feel like the hardest. That's where we're at. That's where we're at, people. But we need everyone to get us over the line. We really do. But it's yeah, I'm very hopeful. And one quick thing that's also in the bill that I thought was just it got me in the heart was that Biden is getting rid of the term alien. We will no longer be aliens. We will be non-citizens. So yeah.
Nice. Zara, Kessa, any can go?
I think you have an amazing panel and we all share something, and I definitely don't add. It's just simply all of us, like, and for myself, is the power is in the people, and we are responsible for changing the direction of this nation, and we are responsible to ensure that our nation continues to be a welcoming place for all people, regardless of their immigration status, color of their skin, sexual orientation, and on. So it's up to us.
Well, I just want to thank you, Remy, and the Africa Center, and then all the distinguished panelists. It's always a pleasure. You know, both an incredibly insightful panel and engaged audience when we get to do events along with the Africa Center. You know, I would just say, we're moving forward. You know, in my organization, we have a saying which we took from Kwame Nkrumah, one of the fathers of Pan-Africanism, and was his famous saying, which is "Forward ever, backwards never." And I know we don't want to go back to 2020 because it was a rough year, and I know we don't want to move backwards through the last 4 years, but we don't want to move backwards to where we were even before the Trump administration. We want to keep moving forward towards a future where African immigrants, other Black immigrants, the entire immigrant diaspora here in the U.S. and all Americans can really be full citizens and full people and achieve their full potential. And so that's my hope, and for the next 4 years, that we all move in that direction together.
Thank you so much. There is an opinion question that is going on. I will really, really appreciate it if you give us your feedback. But all I would like to say is that we had a very rich discussion, and I would like to extend my special thanks to the panelists. Thank you very much, the audience, for joining us. This has been an open, representative, inclusive dialogue. And I mean, it's very key for and very essential for citizen engagement and charting the way forward. I mean, we need more conferences of this, and I would like to specifically ask the Africa Center to bring more of this, not less. Because right now, at this point, after hearing all from the panelists, after discussing the pertinent issues affecting us, we feel empowered. Thanks to the Mayor's Office for bringing us together, Africa Services Committee for joining us. This has been a great platform, and really I feel as a journalist there is so much that I'm going to take note from here. And I know most immigrant communities that have joined us tonight are going to walk away feeling empowered and knowing their rights as immigrants, knowing what they can reach out for when they need, who they can reach out to when they need help. And I feel we have been empowered and enriched with knowledge of how to move on as immigrants in this community. And I'm just going to ask the panelists before you leave to share their social media handles, because I know most people would like to reach out to you and stay connected. So I'm just going to, if you can share your personal Twitter handle, Instagram, and Facebook, but basically the social media handles of the organizations. That would be great for our great audience that joined us tonight. Do you want to just put the social media handles in the chat, or do you want to speak them out, say them out?
We can do both. So I put ours in the chat. So on all platforms, well, on at least on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I don't know about some of these other. We're not on Snapchat or Pinterest or some of these others, but we're at Africans plural. So at Africans US. So like Africans in the US.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to share the social media handles for the Africa Center. It's at the Africa Center, both on Instagram, on Twitter, and Facebook. And please feel free to reach out to these organizations if you need help. The Mayor's Office on Immigrant Affairs is always open. Mr. Mahakasa is really open and happy to hear from you, just like Amanda and Cesar. So I'd like to thank you for joining us, and I just want to say good night for now.